Welcome back to another spine-chilling episode. Tonight, I'm sharing 4 terrifying true stories from people who work the night shift and experience things that still haunt them to this day. These aren't just ghost stories or urban legends. These are real experiences from real people who reached out to me, wanting to share what they went through during those long, dark hours when most of the world is asleep. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for 4 terrifying true night shift horror stories that will haunt you. The Lonely Night Watch. This first story comes from Marcus, a security guard who worked at a 12-story office building in downtown Chicago. Marcus had been doing security work for about 3 years, mostly during the day shift. But when his company offered him a significant pay raise to switch to nights, he jumped at the opportunity. After all, how hard could it be to watch over an empty building? Marcus's shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. The building housed several different companies, accounting firms, law offices, a small tech startup on the 8th floor. During the day, hundreds of people worked there. But at night, it was just Marcus and the silence. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. Marcus would do his rounds every 2 hours, checking each floor, making sure all the doors were locked and no windows were broken. The building had a decent security system with cameras on every floor, so most of his time was spent sitting at the front desk, watching the monitors and reading books. But during his 4th week, things started getting strange. The mysterious elevator. It began with the elevators. Marcus would be sitting at his desk when he'd hear the familiar ding of an elevator arriving. He'd look up at the indicator above the elevator bank and see that one of the cars was moving between floors. At first, he assumed it was just a mechanical issue. Old buildings have quirky systems. But it kept happening, always around 2:30 a.m. Marcus decided to investigate. One night, when he heard the elevator ding, he walked over and pressed the call button. The doors opened immediately, and the elevator was empty. The buttons inside showed that it had stopped on the 7th floor. Marcus rode up to check it out. The 7th floor investigation. The 7th floor was home to a mid-sized law firm. Marcus walked through the darkened office space, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. Everything looked normal. Desks were clear, computers were off, chairs were pushed in. Nothing seemed out of place. But as he was leaving, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of typing. Slow, deliberate typing coming from somewhere in the office. Marcus froze, listening carefully. The typing continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. He called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" His voice echoed through the empty office. No response. Marcus searched every cubicle, every office, every conference room. He was alone on the 7th floor. But as he was walking back toward the elevator, the typing started again. This time, he could pinpoint where it was coming from, a corner office near the windows. Patricia Henley's office. He approached the office slowly. The nameplate on the door read, "Patricia Henley, Senior Partner." Marcus tried the door handle. It was locked. He peered through the glass window, and his heart nearly stopped. Someone was sitting at the desk. In the darkness, he could make out the silhouette of a person hunched over a keyboard, typing. But something was wrong with the figure. It was too thin, too still except for the hands moving over the keys. Marcus banged on the glass. "Hey! The building is closed." The typing stopped. The figure slowly turned toward the door, but Marcus couldn't make out any features in the darkness. Then, the figure stood up and walked toward the back of the office, disappearing into the shadows. Marcus immediately called his supervisor and the police. When they arrived 20 minutes later, they found the office exactly as it should be, empty and locked. The computer wasn't even turned on. There was no way anyone could have been inside. But Marcus knew what he had seen. And it kept happening, every night around 2:30 a.m. The elevator would ding, someone would be typing in Patricia Henley's office, and when Marcus would investigate, the office would be empty. After 2 weeks of this, Marcus finally asked his supervisor about Patricia Henley. His supervisor's face went pale. Patricia Henley had died of a heart attack at her desk 6 months ago. She was working late on a big case when it happened. They found her the next morning, still sitting at her computer. Marcus quit the next day. He told me that even now, 3 years later, he can't hear the sound of typing late at night without feeling that same chill run down his spine. Some people just can't leave their work behind, even in death. Story 2. The Hospital Janitor's Encounter. Hospital Midnight Rounds. Our second story comes from Sarah, who worked as a janitor at St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, Oregon. Sarah had been cleaning hospitals for over 10 years, so she was used to the strange atmosphere that comes with working in a place where people are born and die every day. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened during her shift on October 15th. Sarah's shift began at midnight. She was responsible for cleaning the third and fourth floors. The third floor housed the pediatric wing, and the fourth floor was general surgery recovery. Sarah always started with the fourth floor because it was usually quieter. Most of the surgery patients were sedated or sleeping peacefully after their procedures. That night, Sarah was mopping the hallway on the fourth floor when she noticed something odd. Room 412 had its door slightly open, and she could hear what sounded like children laughing inside. This was strange because room 412 was occupied by an elderly man who had just had gallbladder surgery that morning. He should have been sleeping. The waiting children. Sarah approached the door and gently pushed it open to check on the patient. What she saw made her drop her mop bucket. The elderly man, Mr. Thompson, was lying in his bed, but he wasn't alone. Standing around his bed were 3 children, probably between the ages of 6 and 8. They were wearing old-fashioned hospital gowns and they were playing some kind of game, passing something back and forth between them while giggling softly. But something was terribly wrong with these children. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and Sarah could see right through them to the wall behind. They were ghosts. The warning gesture. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway. One of the children, a little girl with long dark hair, turned and looked directly at her. The child smiled and put a finger to her lips in a shoo gesture, then pointed at Mr. Thompson. Sarah looked at the sleeping man and realized he wasn't breathing normally. His breathing was labored and shallow, and the monitors around his bed were beeping frantically. The children weren't playing a game. They were waiting. The nurse's station alert. Sarah ran to the nurse's station and told them about Mr. Thompson's condition. She didn't mention the children. The nurses rushed to his room and found that he was going into cardiac arrest. They managed to resuscitate him, and he survived. But Sarah couldn't forget what she had seen. She asked one of the older nurses about the children. The nurse, Maria, had been working at St. Mary's for 25 years. When Sarah described what she had seen, Maria's expression became very serious. "You saw them too?" Maria asked quietly. "The waiting children?" Maria explained that several staff members had reported seeing ghost children over the years, always in the rooms of patients who were close to death. The legend was that these children had died at the hospital many years ago, and now they served as a kind of welcome committee for people who were passing away. They would comfort patients during their final moments. "But here's the thing," Maria said. "The children don't just wait for people to die. Sometimes, if they think it's not someone's time yet, they'll make noise to alert the staff. It sounds like that's what happened with Mr. Thompson." Sarah continued working at the hospital for 2 more years, and she saw the children several more times. Each time, they appeared in the room of someone who was either dying or in serious danger. And each time Sarah alerted the medical staff, they were able to save the patient's life. Sarah eventually left St. Mary's to work at a different hospital, but she still thinks about those ghost children. She told me that she's grateful for what they do, even though seeing them never stopped being terrifying. Sometimes the dead watch over the living in ways we can't understand. Story 3. The Gas Station Attendant's Night Visitor. This third story was sent to me by Jake, who worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station on a lonely stretch of highway in rural Nevada. The gas station was one of those old-school places that still had a full-service option, which meant Jake had to go outside and pump gas for customers who requested it. The location was pretty isolated. During the day, they'd get truckers, travelers, and locals from the small town about 15 miles away. But at night, especially during the week, Jake would go hours without seeing a single customer. Jake had been working this shift for about 6 months when he started noticing a pattern. Every Tuesday night, around 3:15 a.m., the same car would pull up to pump number 3. It was an old blue sedan, probably from the 1980s, with rust around the wheel wells and a cracked windshield. The car would always pull up to the full-service pump, and Jake would have to go outside to help. The driver was always the same person, an elderly woman with gray hair and thick glasses. She was polite but quiet, always asking for exactly $10 of regular gasoline. She would pay with exact change, counting out 10 crumpled dollar bills from a small purse. The whole interaction would take maybe 5 minutes, and then she would drive away into the darkness. At first, Jake didn't think much of it. Maybe she was coming home from a late shift somewhere, or visiting someone at the hospital. But after a few weeks, he started to find it odd that she came by at exactly the same time every week, always wanting exactly $10 of gas. One Tuesday night, Jake decided to pay more attention. When the blue sedan pulled up, he watched the woman more carefully. She seemed frail and moved slowly, but there was something else that bothered him. Her clothes looked old-fashioned, like something from decades ago. And despite the cold Nevada nights, she wasn't wearing a jacket. After she left that night, Jake mentioned her to his manager the next day. His manager, Bob, had been running the gas station for 20 years. "An elderly woman in a blue sedan?" Bob asked. "What did she look like?" Jake described her, and Bob's face went white. "Jake, that sounds like Dorothy Marsh." "But that's impossible." Bob explained that Dorothy Marsh used to come to the gas station every Tuesday night for years. She lived alone in a small house about 10 miles up the highway and would drive into town once a week to buy groceries and run errands. She always stopped for gas on the way home, always buying exactly $10 worth because that's all she could afford on her Social Security. "But Jake," Bob said quietly, "Dorothy died in a car accident 3 years ago. She ran off the road during a snowstorm on her way home from the gas station. They found her car wrapped around a tree about 5 miles from here." Jake felt a chill run through his entire body. But he told Bob that he was sure about what he had seen. So Bob pulled out a photo from behind the counter. It was a newspaper clipping about Dorothy's accident, with her picture. It was definitely the same woman. The next Tuesday, Jake waited nervously for 3:15 a.m. Sure enough, the blue sedan pulled up to pump number 3. Jake's hands were shaking as he walked outside. The woman rolled down her window and smiled at him. $10 regular, please," she said in the same polite voice as always. Jake pumped the gas, his mind racing. When he finished, the woman handed him the exact change, 10 wrinkled dollar bills. But as Jake looked at the money, he noticed something that made his blood freeze. The bills were old, really old. The newest one was dated 1987. "Thank you, dear," the woman said. "Drive safely now." As she drove away, Jake ran inside and called Bob. When Bob arrived 20 minutes later, they examined the $10 bills under the bright lights. 7 of them were from the 1980s, 2 were from the 1970s, and 1 was from 1963. Bob took the money and locked it in the safe. The next week, Jake waited for the blue sedan, but it never came. In fact, Dorothy never came back after that night. Jake worked at the gas station for 2 more years, but he never saw her again. Jake told me that he thinks Dorothy had been making her weekly trip out of habit, not realizing that she had died. But when she saw the recognition in Jake's eyes that final night, maybe she understood it was time to move on. The old money was probably from her purse when she died, still trying to pay for her gas, still trying to get home. Story 4. The Factory Worker's Final Shift. Our final story comes from Tom, who worked the night shift at a textile factory in North Carolina. The factory had been operating since the 1940s and employed about 200 people across 3 shifts. Tom worked in quality control, which meant he spent most of his time walking through the factory floor, checking machinery and inspecting products as they came off the production lines. Tom had been working nights for about 2 years when the factory announced it would be closing permanently. Foreign competition had made it impossible to stay profitable, and the company had decided to move all operations overseas. The workers were given 6 weeks' notice, and during those final weeks, the atmosphere in the factory was understandably grim. During the last week of operation, Tom was working alone on the night shift. Most of the day shift workers had already found other jobs or had simply stopped showing up. The factory was running on a skeleton crew, trying to finish the last few orders before shutting down for good. It was Tom's final shift, Thursday night, October 31st. The irony of the date wasn't lost on him. The factory would officially close on Friday, Halloween night, after 37 years of operation. Tom was doing his final rounds when he started hearing strange sounds from the old section of the factory. This area had been shut down for several months as production had scaled back, But now Tom could hear machinery running. The rhythmic clacking and whirring of industrial equipment echoed through the empty halls. Tom went to investigate. The old section was dark, and Tom had to use his flashlight to navigate through the maze of silent machines. But as he got closer to the source of the noise, he realized the sounds weren't coming from the machines around him. They were coming from deeper in the factory, from a section that had been walled off years ago. According to the older workers, that section of the factory had been sealed after a terrible accident in 1987. A fire had started during the night shift, and 3 workers had been trapped inside when part of the building collapsed. The company had rebuilt rather than repair, simply walling off the damaged area and expanding in a different direction. But tonight, Tom could hear machinery running behind that wall. And more disturbing, he could hear voices, people talking and calling out to each other like workers coordinating on a production line. Tom pressed his ear against the wall. The sounds were definitely coming from the other side. He could make out individual voices now. A man shouting, "Watch the conveyor on line 3." A woman calling, "I need more thread over here." The normal sounds of a busy factory floor. But that was impossible. The sealed section had been empty for over 15 years. Tom found an old service door that led to the sealed area. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusty. With some effort, Tom managed to break it open. The door creaked as it swung open, and a rush of stale air hit him in the face. Tom stepped into the sealed section and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The area had been gutted by the fire years ago, but now it looked like it had been restored. The machines were running, lights were on, and Tom could see people working at different stations throughout the floor. But these weren't normal people. They moved strangely, their motions too fluid, too repetitive. And their clothes were wrong. They were wearing the style of work uniforms from the 1980s, not the modern safety gear the company had switched to years ago. One of the workers, a middle-aged man operating a large loom, turned and looked at Tom. The man's face was pale and his eyes were sunken, but he smiled and waved. "You here for the final shift?" the man called out over the noise of the machinery. Tom couldn't speak. He just stared as more workers turned to look at him. There were dozens of them, all wearing those old uniforms, all with that same pale, sunken appearance. A woman approached Tom. She was probably in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a hairnet. "Don't be scared," she said kindly. "We've been waiting for the factory to close. We couldn't leave while it was still running. But now that it's ending, we can finally rest." Tom realized these were the workers who had died in the fire. They had been trapped in this section of the factory, not just by the collapse, but by their dedication to their jobs. They couldn't move on while the factory was still operational. "The factory was our life," the woman explained. "Even death couldn't make us abandon our posts. But tonight, when the final shift ends, we can finally go home." Tom backed toward the door, but the woman held up her hand. "Wait," she said. "We need you to do something for us. When you leave tonight, when you turn off the lights for the last time, say goodbye to the factory. Tell it that its workers are finally at peace." Tom nodded, too terrified to speak. He turned and ran back through the service door, slamming it behind him. The sounds of machinery and voices continued for a few more minutes, then gradually faded to silence. Tom finished his shift and left the factory at 6 a.m., just as the sun was rising. As he was walking to his car, he turned back and looked at the old building one last time. "Goodbye, old friend," he said quietly. "Rest in peace." Tom never went back to the factory, but he heard from other former workers that the building was demolished 6 months later. The construction crew reported finding the remains of 3 workers in the sealed section, finally giving them a proper burial 37 years after they died. Tom told me that he believes some people are so dedicated to their work that even death can't make them abandon their responsibilities. But eventually, everyone deserves to rest. These 4 stories remind us that the night shift can reveal things that the daylight world never sees. Whether it's the spirits of those who can't let go, the ghosts of children watching over the living, or the dedication of workers who refuse to abandon their posts even in death, the darkness holds mysteries that we may never fully understand. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. And remember, the next time you're working late at night and you hear something that shouldn't be there, maybe it's not your imagination after all. Sweet dreams.